course, we're in the season of Advent, and Advent means arrival. And we prepare ourselves here at Christmas time in the season of Advent for the arrival of Jesus Christ into our lives all over again on Christmas Day. And so far in this series, we've been asking the question, how can we welcome Jesus into our lives all over again this Advent? And by partnering with Jesus and what he wants to do in the world and bringing beauty to the ugliness around us. And of course, we see ugliness wherever we look. It's not hard to find, like I mentioned in the intro, in world events or whether it's in our own personal lives. And of course, it all depends on your perspective as well. So my family, we have 2 cats, and they're a little over a year and a half old. And so this is their first Christmas as full-grown cats with ornaments on the tree. And so they're enjoying themselves, and I saw a meme that I love. I think it's great when you think about ugliness. These are Christmas ornaments, and they're going to see a horror movie called Pause. And you can't read the poster, but it says, just when you thought it was safe to go back on the tree, pause. And you can just hear the music, da-da. So it depends on our perspective, of course, whether, pause our ugliness if you are an ornament. But tonight we want to take a look at how we can see opportunities to bring beauty to the ugliness around us. And of course, we're going to read a story from the Christmas story, or a scripture from the Christmas story. And this is when the angel Gabriel appears to Mary, the mother of Jesus, in her hometown of Nazareth, and announces to her that she will give birth to a son, the baby Jesus. And Mary was likely very young, perhaps even 14. When this took place, and she lived in a small, relatively poor village, essentially unknown in the ancient world, and her family lived in what may have been a cave. I've been in Israel, I've had the privilege to go there, and when you go there, you see what is thought of to be Mary's home, whether it really was or not, we're not sure, but it's essentially a cave. And so this is a young girl from a poor town in a time of patriarchy and a time of great inequality, who was essentially invisible. And she knew what it was like to be on the wrong side of the tracks. And Gabriel appears to her and makes the announcement that she will give birth to the baby Jesus. And Mary said, I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. And then we have in Luke chapter 1 what's called the Magnificat, Mary's song of praise to God about who God is and how God wants to bring beauty into the ugliness of the world. And Mary's song is a way of saying, Lord, I'm open to partnering with you. I want to partner with you in your work of bringing beauty into the ugliness in the world. And so let's read the Magnificat together, starting with Luke chapter 1, verse 46. And Mary said, my soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him or who have respect for him. From generation to generation, he has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, just as he promised our ancestors. And so Mary's song recounts how God has brought beauty into the ugliness before in Israel's history, and how she feels that God has brought beauty into her life, and again, that she wants to partner with God. She wants to join with God in God's work of bringing beauty into the ugliness of the world. And she's thankful, and she also knows why beauty needs to be brought into the world, because, again, she's in a place in life where she is exposed to the ugliness of the world. She is more likely to be a victim of injustice, a victim of corruption, her poverty, and her, in a sense, invisible status in her world. And so she's able to see how God can bring beauty into the world because she can see the ugliness of the world. And she praises God and wants to partner with God. So we all know there is a lot of ugliness in the world, and at the same time, I think it's important to begin by saying that we are bombarded by ugliness through different media, mass media, and social media, and that may actually cloud our vision of how much ugliness versus beauty there is in the world. And I use social media. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Haven't quite figured out TikTok yet. Probably too old for that, but I like social media. I use social media, and there are good things about it. But I think a lot of times maybe you agree with me, we fail to realize how much it skews our thinking and our perspective. And if you're old enough to remember a world before social media, think about what it was like before social media. And so there have been many, many studies conducted at this point about how social media affects our brains and our view of the world, including how much ugliness we believe there is in the world. So, for example, the Canadian Medical Association Journal published a study on March 22nd of last year called Protecting the Brain Against Bad News by Robin Blades. And I'll read a little bit from the article, and then I have a quote to share that'll be on the screen. It says, "The impulse to consume negative news can be difficult to resist. We are evolutionarily wired to screen for and anticipate danger, which is why keeping our fingers on the pulse of bad news may trick us into feeling more prepared." If we scroll through, we might feel like we're more prepared for the danger. And following the news may be necessary to stay informed, but a counselor named Cecil Arends says the feelings of fear, sadness, and anger triggered by negative headlines can keep people stuck in a pattern of frequent monitoring. It's where we're always in a sense of heightened alert, and we're always kind of rifling through social media because we feel like we'll be more prepared if we read about all the bad news. And of course, there's a word that was kind of coined the past couple of years for scrolling through bad news. Do you remember what it is? Doom scrolling. And she says that doom scrolling can take a toll on our mental health. And then here's the quote that I have to share. "Studies have linked the consumption of bad news to increase distress, anxiety, and depression, even when the news in question is relatively mundane. According to Graham Davey, Professor Emeritus of Psychology at the University of Sussex, exposure to bad news can make personal worries seem worse." Isn't that interesting? "And even cause acute stress reactions and some symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that can be quite long-lasting." And I kind of felt this a couple of weeks ago, and for some reason it hit me, maybe because I was preparing, for this sermon, but I was scrolling through Facebook, and by the way, have you noticed like half of your Facebook feed is ads now? Over the past couple of weeks, that's new, isn't it? And that's an aside, but I was scrolling through Facebook, and it was horrible story after horrible story. And then I would see something that a friend posted, and then a few more ads, and then another really sad story from another part of the country or a different part of the world. And then I see, a picture of my friend's cat, and then I keep scrolling, and there's some ads, and then more horrible news from some other place far away from where I am. And I thought, especially as I read this article, that you and I did not develop in a world where we are constantly bombarded with all of the bad news in the world in real time. That's not the experience of life that we developed in as human beings. Of course, we lived in tribes and villages, and we had the normal ups and downs of life, our ancestors did, but they were not exposed to every bad thing that happens while it's happening through social media and just bombarded. I think that's the right word, bombarded by bad news, even in the form of clickbait. We didn't develop, our brains didn't develop in that kind of world. And it's only in the past 20, 25 years since the invention of social media that we are exposed to bad news like this. And the point of this article is, and I think essentially there will be, studies for decades, because we're all pretty much guinea pigs. Do you realize that? When it comes to social media and its effects on our brains and our lives, there will be research for decades about how this is just not good for us. We're not equipped to deal with all of the bad news instantly in real time, which leads to the point, actually there is probably more beauty in the world than we realize, because we're constantly bombarded by ugliness. So that just needs to be said. Many of us, we feel anxiety, we feel distressed, because we're constantly bombarded by bad news, and as the study found, it even makes our own personal worries seem worse. And it just seems like the world is so ugly. And of course, there is so much ugliness and injustice and corruption in the world. And we want to have a heart for justice and partnering with God and God's work of the world. That's the whole point of the Magnificat. But we do need to, I think, say that perhaps the world is more beautiful than we see now because of the bad news that we're bombarded with and how it affects our mental health. Which brings me to an important announcement. If you were here earlier, you saw the announcements cycle through in the pre-service video. But on January 8th, that's the next time we'll be back in this room for a service, we're going to begin a brand new sermon series that I think will be one of the most timely topics we could talk about as we start 2023 America. And it's entitled Peace of Mind, Faith and Mental Health. And so we're going to talk about how our faith interacts with our mental health. We'll talk about depression and anxiety and religious trauma, pain caused by negative experiences of religion and avoiding burnout, and of course, just reducing stress and more. And so we'll also welcome a couple of guest speakers during that series. On January 15th, we're going to welcome our own special guest from our congregation, Carrie Wester. Carrie's a member of the Well, and she's a chaplain and manager of spiritual care at Dignity Health here in the Valley, and she's an expert on the topic. She presents on the topic of faith and mental health in professional conferences. And so she's going to share with us, what is mental health? What is mental illness? And kind of lay the groundwork for us as we talk about the relationship of faith and mental health. And then so we're excited about having Carrie speak with us. And then on February 12th, we're going to welcome back our friend Colby Martin. Some of you know Colby. He's the author of a couple of books, one called Unclobber, that's been great in the lives of so many people, another one called Faith Shift, and he has a new book coming out, and he's going to be talking to us about religious guilt and shame in mental health. So if you feel any of that in your life, you could benefit from this series. So we're very excited about starting this new series, Peace of Mind, on January 8th. But all that to make the point, as we begin, because of all of the clickbait and the bad news that we see every day, there probably is more beauty in the world than we can see. There's more than we realize. But in addition to that, we can partner with God to bring more beauty to the ugliness, just like Mary wanted to. So a few weeks ago, we had an angel tree in the back here, and we put tags on the angel tree, and they were gift requests from children, many of them experiencing homelessness here locally. And the ladies from our missions team who put the tags up on the tree said we wanted to take a cute picture of the tree with all the tags, but people at the well took the tags so fast we couldn't even get a picture. She said their generosity was just overwhelming, and the tags were gone so fast. And that week I saw on the Well message board, which is a Facebook group where we share messages, and somebody said that they couldn't make it to the service, and they wanted to get a tag from the angel tree, but they couldn't make it, and they asked if there's a way they could get a tag. And somebody else from the congregation responded and said, well, we picked two, so we'll just send you a picture of ours. And they put a picture of their tag there on the Well message board. And I want to show you a picture of that tag. It's a child who's requested a cozy blanket. And when I saw that, I wanted to cry. Because I know all of the things that many children would like to have and the gifts that they request, and it brought me back to reality of the ugliness in our world, that there are children who have the need for a cozy blanket, and there were others, of course, a coat, and the necessities of life. That's what was on the angel tree. But when we think about bringing beauty into the ugliness of our world, here's what you did. You all grabbed tags off of the angel tree. And then a couple of weeks ago, we had a huge pile of gifts back in the back of the room underneath that tree that you purchased and wrapped and that you're going to give to some people in need. So here's what's going to happen as we think about bringing ugliness or bringing beauty into the ugliness of our world. A child's going to open a package. And you're going to see their little face light up. And they're going to go, oh! And they're going to hold a blanket to their little face. And they're going to say, it's so soft. It's so cozy. And you can imagine the look on that child's face. And that's going to be because you did that. You brought beauty into the ugliness of that situation. It was your generosity, your compassion that brought beauty into that situation. Mary's saying God fills the hungry with good things. And when we're generous and we share with people in need, we're joining with God in bringing beauty into the ugliness of poverty and inequality and corruption that leads to the kind of situation where a child just really needs a cozy blanket. But that child will experience beauty because of what you did. Do you think that's worth celebrating tonight? The generosity of this congregation and the beauty of what you did? I think it is. I think that kind of beauty is worth celebrating because you made that happen. And that's one of the ways that we partner with God. You bring beauty by being generous. Mary's saying God fills the hungry with good things. And when we partner with God to fill the hungry with good things and supply the necessities that so many need, we bring beauty into the ugliness around us. And then Mary's song also speaks of God leveling the playing field, in a sense, of bringing down the proud, bringing down rulers from their thrones, and lifting up the humble. Of course, we don't want to be prideful people that God humbles. We don't want to be people like that. We want to humble ourselves. We want to be the kind of people that God can lift up. And one of the ways that we can humble ourselves and bring beauty into ugliness is when we have done something wrong, when we have brought injury, when we have cost somebody something, when we have hurt someone, that we apologize, but then we also do our best to make amends, to make it right. And I have friends in recovery who will talk about making amends, and that's one way that we can partner with God to level the playing field, to bring down the proud, but uplift the humble. And we want to humble ourselves and level the playing field and make things right wherever we can. So, saw a great example this recently, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. This may be the only church where Christmas Eve they're talking about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson tonight, and I'm proud of that. So Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson recently went back to Hawaii, where he lived for a couple of years as a teenager, and he said he wanted to make something right. So he said his family couldn't really afford to live there. They were actually evicted from their house when he was a teenager. And he said when he was about 14, 15 years old, he went into a 7-Eleven every day in Hawaii, and he stole a Snickers bar every morning. And he stole a Snickers bar right before he went to work out. And so that was like his pre-workout meal. I wish eating a Snickers bar made me look like The Rock. That's not what happens when I eat a candy bar, but that was his pre-workout meal. And he said the cashier at 7-Eleven had to see me at some point throughout that year when I stole a Snickers bar. But he said ever since then, that's bothered him, that he stole Snickers bars. And he joked, this is the week of Thanksgiving, that he had exorcised his chocolate demon in this 7-Eleven when he went back there on Thanksgiving week. And what he did was he went back to that same store and he bought all the candy bars they had, and he put them on the counter, and he told the cashier to give a Snickers to any customer who looked like they were about to steal one. And he paid for all the Snickers, and then the people who were in the convenience store, he paid for all their groceries as well while he was in there. And he said on his Instagram, even though it might seem silly to some people, he said that every time that he had gone back to Hawaii and he had seen that 7-Eleven, he always knew that he needed to make it right. He felt guilty about what he had done, and so he said it was the least I could do considering all the stuff I used to steal from here. And then I have a quote from The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, and I just think it's worth reading when we think about bringing beauty into the ugliness of the world. He said, "We can't change the past and some of the dumb stuff we may have done, but every once in a while we can add a little redeeming grace note to that situation and maybe put a big smile on some strangers' faces." And so there are times in life when of course, people hurt us, and there are times when we hurt others. And we talked last week about what forgiveness means and what it doesn't mean. And that's really important. If you were not here for that, or if you're new, I would encourage you to go to our website, wellchurch.org, and listen to that. Because it's very important to think about what forgiveness means and what it doesn't. But at the same time, sometimes we hurt others. And then we come to the holidays, and we have strained relationships. And there are times, and this is also important for a pastor to say, there are times that we can't be reconciled. Not every relationship can be fixed. Sometimes the trust issues run too deep. You can't reconcile with somebody who doesn't want to be reconciled with. But there are times when we could, again, like my friends in recovery say, we'll say to clean our side of the street and try to make amends and do the right thing. And so another way we can partner with God and level the playing field and humble ourselves, perhaps, is to bring beauty by making wrong things right. Mary's song speaks of God leveling the playing field, of bringing down the proud, but uplifting the humble. And so I read that and I think, is there any way that I need to humble myself? And go to somebody and say, you know what, maybe I said this or I acted in this way and I just want to make it right. Is there any way that I could make amends? And I had to laugh because when I Googled the story about the rock, Google, you know how Google will actually answer frequently asked questions? The question was, did the rock buy all Snickers? And the answer was no, just some at that 7-Eleven. So apparently it was a worldwide concern that the rock bought all Snickers. But we can partner with God by making wrong things right. And then finally, in the Magnificat, Mary sings about how God brings beauty into the ugliness of the world by caring about the vulnerable, the marginalized, like Mary and her little baby boy who was born in a stable and laid in a feeding trough. People who may be invisible in the eyes of the world. They're not in power. They just kind of get tossed about by political games and those, the haves versus the have-nots. And so Mary sings that we can partner with God and bring beauty to the ugliness around us by being mindful of those who are vulnerable. And when a building was dedicated to the former Vice President Hubert Humphrey in 1977, he gave a speech and he included this famous quote that has been kind of reattributed to other people falsely, but former Vice President Hubert Humphrey said, "The moral test of government is how that government treats those who are in the dawn of life, children, those who are in the twilight of life, the elderly, those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped." And so that quote's been reworded in different ways, but essentially the measure of a society, the measure of a people, is how it treats those who are most vulnerable. And in Mary's song, she writes that you have seen me, you have been mindful of the humble state of your servant. In a world in which Mary was invisible to many people, she was overjoyed that God saw her, that she was seen, somebody in her vulnerable state. And we have the kids with us tonight from Well Kids who sang, and all the kids are with us tonight. By the way, can we thank Well Kids for singing? And they did such a great job, and we're so thankful for our kids here in Well Kids and our teenagers and so on. And then you think about who Hubert Humphrey was talking about, those of us who are maybe older, maybe those of us who are at a place in life when we don't feel the way that we used to. And we're dealing with sickness and doctor appointments and how we feel. And there are times that people overlook us. And some of us who maybe we have different things we have to deal with in life, and you feel like people overlook you, or that sometimes people will try to use you in some way to make themselves feel better and control you to some extent. And so I want to close with this story. It comes from the actor Danny Kaye, who was in one of the most famous Christmas movies, White Christmas. And he wrote an article in Guideposts, if you remember that title, in 1963. And it's about parenting and selfless love, but it could be applied to any of us, but especially those who are in a more vulnerable state. And he wrote that when his daughter Dina was small, around 3 years old, she, of course, couldn't understand why he had to travel so much as an actor and be away from home in various acting roles. And every time he got ready to leave, he would promise her that when he got back, he would lavish gifts on her, and they would do this and that and all kinds of fun activities. And so he felt guilty for leaving, but he was always trying to make her happy so he didn't feel guilty. by giving her things and making promises to her. And he said when she was 6, she had finally caught on. And when he told her about how all the fun things, all the fun things they were going to do, she said, "You're going away, aren't you, Daddy?" And so he wrote that every time he returned home, this went on for several years, he would throw parties and give her all kinds of gifts and created fun events. And he longed to hear his daughter say, "I missed you, Daddy." But she never did. And then the World Health Organization invited Danny Kaye to travel to India and raise awareness about childhood diseases and the need for support. So he was away from home again, and he said, "At one point on the trip, I found myself in a hospital in New Delhi, India, in a room where a mother and father sat quietly watching their little son who had just been brought in from the operating room." And he wrote, "When the boy awoke, I expected them to rush toward him, but they continued to sit quietly in their corner. The boy looked around and saw them, but said nothing. After a while, he called to them, and they came. They touched him gently, never losing the restraint they had on themselves, never showing any fear or concern, though they must have felt both deeply. They attended to his need, and when done, returned to sit quietly. When he wanted something, they saw to it." And then Danny Kaye writes this, when we think about the vulnerable in society: "The boy determined when he needed them and how much he needed them. The parents did not smother him with their love or their fears, but they were pillars of strength and comfort and security." And he said, "This lesson was vividly in my mind and heart when I returned home, and Dina and her mother met me at the airport. And this time, I didn't bring the usual ton of gifts, nor did I lavish on Dina kisses and promises. I greeted them both with a warm hug and kiss, and on the way home, talked easily and casually about ordinary things. My wife, Sylvia, sensed what I was trying to do, and bless her, helped right along. I let Dina, the child, set the pace and ask the questions. For once, I was trying to find out what she wanted, not satisfy what I wanted. And when we got home, Dina squeezed my hand and said what I had wanted to hear her say for a long time. I missed you, Daddy." And then he writes this, and I have this on the screen. "I learned a lot that day. That day and the day I spent in the New Delhi hospital room watching a mother and father who knew how to give love, not smother it." And so for some of us, it could be that a message from Mary's song and bringing beauty into the ugliness of the world might be, well, there are times we feel guilt, and we try to assuage that the way Danny Kaye did, or we try to do this and that. And when we're confronted with something that makes us uncomfortable, especially with those who are more vulnerable, sometimes we rush to control that to relieve our own guilt. And we don't necessarily think of the needs of that person. We just want to make ourselves feel better instead of letting them have their own feelings. And they set the pace, and they describe what they need. And maybe it's that way in our family or friendship situations. Maybe it's that way in society. When we as a people here at the end of 2022 and as we go into 2023 have the opportunity to listen to those who are more vulnerable in society instead of trying to control them or make ourselves feel less guilty, but listen. As Hubert Humphrey said, the measure of a people is how they treat the most vulnerable. And so loving the vulnerable, as Mary says, looks like partnering with God to meet their needs. And so because we're bombarded by bad news in the form of clickbait and mass media and social media, our vision is skewed. As the study we read, there is more beauty in the world than we can see this Christmas season. Many of us, we feel stressed and anxious because we're just soaked in this environment of bad news. And so perhaps a good news message of Christmas is, no, there is more beauty in the world than we feel like there is. And at the same time, we can partner with God to bring beauty by giving generously to people in need, like you did through Angel Tree. And we can bring beauty by making things right, however we can, if things have been wrong. And we can bring beauty by being mindful of those who are the most vulnerable, asking what they really need and how could God meet that need through me. So like Mary, we have the opportunity this Christmas and the ugliness that we see around us, to partner with God to bring beauty into that ugliness. I invite you to pray with me. Oh God, we thank you for this inspiring scripture, the Magnificat. And as we think about the Christmas spirit and what it means to celebrate Christmas, we'll open gifts, hopefully, and share gifts, and hopefully share good times. Some will experience loneliness. And at the same time, God, when we think about what it really means to feel the Christmas spirit, well, Christmas is about Jesus Christ. And his mother apparently raised him with the same kind of values that we read about in the Magnificat, because Jesus grew up to teach us things like loving our neighbors, ourselves, and treating other people the way we want to be treated, which certainly guides us in how we can bring beauty into the ugliness around us. Some of us, God, tonight, we feel ugliness because of the treatment of other people. Some of us, we feel strained relationships. There's an awkwardness, there's a pain around the holidays. But God, like Mary, you see us. You are mindful of our state. Our pain is not invisible to you, and we are not alone any more than Mary was when the angel appeared to her, because God saw her and God sees us. And maybe the Magnificat, Mary's song, is an invitation to us to think about, because we're overwhelmed by your love and we know that you see us and you bring beauty into our lives, into the ugliness around us. We want to partner with you to bring beauty into the ugliness around us. And that's what the Christmas spirit's all about. And as we do that, we do shine the light of Christ. And as we sing Silent Night tonight, it symbolizes the way we want to live, to shine the light of Jesus and to bring beauty into the ugliness of our world. So God, we thank you that we get to celebrate here in person and online. And we get to sing about bringing beauty into the ugliness around us. And we get to partner with you. In Jesus' name, everybody said, amen.